Hello, I am the Grub Street Vlogger, and now into March. Thank goodness, because February's been a bit rubbish. Not only has it been full of storms, but I just haven't had the mojo, the oomph to do much. I even had a week off, and I've really only read one book this whole month. Not only that, I've barely written anything. This novel, which I think is going to be really good, which I started with lots of fanfare and dedication in January, has already sort of fizzled out a little bit, and I need to revive it again. It's all a bit rubbish. But hey, February, here's what I read. I read this book here. It's called The Rise and Fall of the Woman of Letters. It is by Norma Clarke, who I very much like. She wrote a brilliant book on Samuel Johnson's relationship with various women, and she wrote a really, really good book recently about Goldsmith, which I'm going to reread soon, July, I think. This is her first book, if I'm right, and it's all about how there became a certain kind of woman, the woman of letters, who was allowed to write novels and philosophy and all sorts of other things, and how by the middle of the 19th century the memory of the woman of letters has kind of disappeared, and the whole tradition had kind of gone. And this is how it built up, and then where it went. And the general story seems to be, you start with a court, the court of King Charles II, and you've got wits, and around those wits you have witty women, and witty women are supported by patrons, and they start releasing plays, and they start making novels and other things like that. And then as the whole patronage thing goes, you've got the marketplace building up. So actually quite a few women writers were Jacobites and went off to Saint-Germain to support that court, because that's where their patrons were. But then you've got other women writing for the marketplace. And as long as they present themselves the right way, then the marketplace accepts them. Essentially, it's a case of virgin whore complex. They've got to either be very, very pure, almost hermit-alike, or they've got to be sort of sexual miscreants. And one of those is writing important books, and the other is writing dangerous books. Of course, in reality, it was just women writing, but this is how the marketing went. And then as this went on, the noble type of women become the woman of letters. And so you have to be a very specific type of person. And so the book begins with Anna Seward, who lived in Lichfield. I'm not a huge fan of her because she didn't like Erasmus. Well, she had a very awkward relationship with Erasmus Darwin. She didn't... she thought he was immoral, which from her point of view he was. I mean, he was an atheist who believed in evolution. But also she thought Johnson was a bully, and that he didn't read text close enough, and that she, in her sort of very pedantic close reading of texts, was a far better critic. And so she's sort of put as this top example of the woman of letters. And I have to say, she's very brave. The way she carves out her own path, the way she's certain about what she wants, and the way she dedicates herself to her writing, to her poetry, but more importantly to her criticism. And then that disappears. It becomes a joke. It becomes, haha, look at those pedantic blue stockings. It becomes, old maiden aunt who thinks she's a bit something because she knows Latin, and it just disappears. And so the aim of this job is to revive it and to introduce you to all sorts of fascinating people. There's Susanna Centlivre, who is a strolling player, and she gets released from her strolling play, and she becomes a beggar, and she manages to beg her way into patronage, which impressive. I'd like to be able to do something like that. That'd be brilliant. And then there's this Irish lady whose name currently is out of my mind. I even read one of her books. Hang on. and she came over from Ireland. She wrote books about how the Irish experience, but then she married a vicar, and then when he died, she owned a coffee shop in Cambridge, and all the Cambridge students sort of supported her. Mary Davys, that's her name, and she was really interesting. And then there's Orinda, Catherine Phillips, and Orinda is sort of seen as the epitome of the brilliant female poetess, and all of the succeeding people for almost a whole century are all saying, I want to be the next Orinda, count me as Orinda, you and Orinda are equals. And now we've never heard of Orinda, and I couldn't tell you any of her poems. I may have some. I haven't looked. I really should have in my 18th century verse. So I'll have a good look at that later. She might be 17th. Well, yeah, she's not 18th, is she? She's 17th century. I've got a 17th century verse. Definitely got a 16th. I'll have a look at that later anyway. So yeah, it's a very interesting book. It's a little bit scattershot. You get loads of interesting stories about people, but it doesn't completely tie it all together into a story. I'd have liked a bit more of that, simply because it was something I didn't know much about. But I found it a really good book, and I'm looking forward to writing up my thoughts about it, because that will make it clearer in my head. When I just talk about it like this, it's a bit all over the place. I find I organise my thoughts much better on paper. So check out the blog probably this week, and you should get that, because it's also the start of Women's History Month in March, which I didn't know, but that makes sense for the rise and fall of the women of letters on the Grub Street Lodger blog. Now, although I said I only read one book, I did only read that book whole. I did finish the rest of this that I started last month. So, where were we up to? We'd finished the history of Queen Zara, which wasn't great. And we're on to Love Intrigues, or the history of the amours of Bosville and Galicia, as related to Lucasia in Saint-Germain-Garden. This is by Jane Barker. She's one of those women writers who went off to Saint-Germain with King James II and formed a sort of Jacobite rival court there. And this is a largely autobiographical piece, and it's all about how she failed to get the husband of her dreams. Starts creepy. She's very young, and a man says, "Oh, I like that. When she's a bit older, I'll marry her, thanks." And she doesn't much like him. She prefers her cousin, which is not much less icky, to be honest. But hey, the man who likes her tries to hurry the parents into getting her married, but then dies before the marriage happens. So she's escaped that, and now she can pursue the person she prefers. This guy called Bosville. Trouble is, Bosville seems in two minds. Sometimes he adores her, and sometimes he ignores her. And I actually thought the twist was going to be that there were two Bosvilles, and that they had to pretend to be the same person, and one of them loved her and one of them didn't. But it was way simpler than that, and a bit more of an anticlimax. It turned out that Bosville just wasn't sure whether she loved him. And so occasionally he'd go all for it, and would feel that she hadn't properly responded, and so he'd back off, but then, quite liking her, he'd then go after her again. And he never properly read her love language, and that's what it is. And so, yeah, a bit of an anticlimax and a bit of a non-novel. I told you it was autobiographical, so I suppose that's why it does come off as a bit flat. But it's very well written. There's this bit where she is angry at Bosville for pulling away, and she goes on this huge rant about how she'd murder him, and goes into great detail about how she'd do it, and how all the rest of womankind would celebrate her for killing this inconstant, unfaithful male. Indeed, in all these books, the inconstancy of men is quite an interesting theme. And also, she's very good at tying it thematically with language, because our main character, Galicia, she is trying to learn Latin at one point, and she has trouble with the Amora Masamat, and similarly, she can't quite get the love conjugations on with Boswell, so I quite like the thematic way. It's a bit of a rubbish story, but well told, essentially. Then the next one was The Adventures of Count de Vinevil by Penelope Aubin, and this was something very different. So Penelope Aubin, she wants to write good, wholesome entertainment, and she wants to write good Christian entertainment that teaches honour and morality, and she also wants to titillate you. And she says she's doing this in the prologue, and she also says, "Oh, Robinson Crusoe did well, so I'll set it somewhere foreign," and so it's set in Turkey. Yeah, not for the modern reader, this particular book. So you have Count Vinevil, who's this old man, his beautiful daughter, who is not very well described, even though she's the main character because she's beautiful. What more do you need? And then this guy called the Count de Longueville, who has a whole page listing all of his brilliant qualities, which of course means you hate him. And they all go to Turkey because their money's running out, and they need to do a bit of bartering with the Turks. And it is so racist and so Islamophobic. So they come into the Constantinople, and they see repurposed churches, and again the odious mosques, where the vile impostor's name is echoed through the empty choirs and vaults, where cursed Mahometans profane the sacred piles once consecrate to our Redeemer. And of course, these terrible Muslims are not only awful people and liars, but they all want to have sex with the daughter Adeliza, and so they make a plan to. She goes on a sleepover, so she's out of the way. Count de Longueville, the young man, has a boat with all the goods that they're sneaking out, and then the older Count Vinevil is holed up, and he gets murdered by this horrible guy called Mohammed, who desperately wants Adeliza, and he says, "Go fetch her naked out of her bed so I can have her in front of her stupid father," but she's not around. And the rest of the book consists of us following Adeliza around as she finds hundreds, it seems, upon hundreds of Christian hermits who live round about the countryside in Turkey. And as she's sneaking away from the horrible, lust-driven, evil Muslims. And then she goes on a boat and they get shipwrecked, and then they get found, and then everyone comes together and happily ever after. But it's so icky. For example, when they find out that the first guy is after Adeliza, Count de Longueville says, "Well, quick, I want to marry her because I don't want her to die without me having first enjoyed her." What a romantic. Oh, I mean, the whole thing is horrible, but it's horrible in a way that's interesting, at least. You read it and you don't agree, and it's disgusting and racist and misogynistic and just generally most kinds of unpleasant. But at least there's something to grab onto. But then after that, we went to one of my favourites. We went to Eliza Haywood. I love Eliza Haywood. Love and Excess, one of my favourite 18th century novels. This was called The British Recluse. It is about a woman who goes to a tavern, an inn, and there's a mysterious reclusive woman there, and she manages to find out and get the story from this reclusive woman. And it's a pretty typical story. She was conned by a charming rake, your Lovelacy kind of guy, who promises all this marriage and good stuff and then doesn't deliver. And then she said, and the woman who's been told this by the recluse says, "Yeah, I've had the same experience. It was this horrible guy and he conned me." And then they both realise that they're talking about the same man. And so what happens at the end of the book is that they live together, forswearing all male company because men are evil. And yeah, it was very entertaining. I actually didn't guess the twist that it was the same man they were talking about. I just thought he was A-type, but no, it's this one guy. Maybe the one guy is responsible for all of the horrible, rakish aristocrats in all of fiction. Maybe it's just that one person responsible. And so yeah, it's Eliza Haywood. It's good fun. It's not as good as Love in Excess because it's not as nutty, but it was good. But the next one after that, another Eliza Haywood, Fantomina. That is wonderfully nutty. That's the best one in this book. So our heroine, she's a good girl. She does all that she's told, and she's very demure. And she's sitting in the theatre, and she's seeing all the people in masks, chatting up all the men, and she thinks that looks fun. Might have a go at that. So she sees the man she really likes, and she chats him up wearing her mask, and they have a relationship. But he gets tired, and so she goes into another disguise, and she goes in this other disguise and has another relationship with him. And then he gets bored of her, so she goes in another relationship, has another disguise, and has another relationship with him. And then the man, as he's dying, she comes back in the first one in the mask, and they connect, and he's like, oh, you're a person I've always wanted, and then she reveals that she was all these people all along, and he's like, oh, I loved you all my life anyway, and he dies. It's just crazy. I love it, and just the way she goes, right, oh, he's bored of me again. Suppose I better dress up as a shepherdess. It's just silly. It's just really enjoyable silly, and I liked it very, very much. Best one in here. Next one was The Reformed Coquette by Mary Davys. It's probably my second favourite, actually. So your main character, she's been sort of coddled her whole life. Parents are dead. She's rich, and she has all these men flocking around her, and she loves the attention, and so she gives them all the time of day. And also, she's a nice person. She doesn't want to disappoint people, and she doesn't want to write people off either. So she has all these people, and she's giving them all this attention. The Lord's probably the best one, but there's all these other guys as well. Yeah, that's her life for the moment. And then her uncle sends this man, who's this old man in this beard, which I'm trying to grow. It's not just dirt. So this old man in a beard, and he has lots of advice for her, and you start having these little games. So there are two people who are rivals for her affection, and then they make a plan to work together to kidnap her, probably rape her, and steal all her money. And someone overhears this, and so now they put in men in their place, and the men beat them up, and they go off and live in penury. Actually, they don't. They go off, they accuse each other of ruining the plan, and they have a duel and stab each other at the same time. And all these other sort of events take place. So then the Lord is revealed to be just a flirt and not really very serious, and so they get rid of him. And then someone tries to kidnap her, but she beats them off. And then there are these two women turn up. One is her friend, one is this mysterious woman. It turns out this mysterious woman is a man who saw her once in Bath and really fancies her, and so has dressed up as a woman to get close to her. So they pack them off, and then she gets kidnapped again on a boat, and this person gets fought off by this handsome man, and she's like, "Who's the handsome man? I recognise him, but I don't know him. I like this handsome man." And it turns out the handsome man was the guy in the beard, and he's been wearing a fake beard the whole time and pretending to be an old man, just so he can keep an eye on her and teach her to be a more serious person. Again, I like this kind of thing. It's silly, and it's daft, and it's cartoony almost, and I very much enjoyed it. Your last one in here is just freaky. It's only a selection. It's called Friendship in Death, and it's by Elizabeth Singer Rowe, or Rowe, Rowe, and it's letters from dead people to living people. So there's a baby who's written to his mum saying, "Mum, why are you so sad? I'm now a lovely spirit baby and having a wonderful time. Don't be sad." And there's a friend writing to a friend saying, hey, you're an atheist. I wouldn't be that if I were you. Here's a message from your dead mate. And then there's a really weird one where it's somebody writing back saying, I know I died really young, but don't be too sad because it's a good thing we didn't get it on because actually secretly we were brother and sister, and it would have been really bad. So thank goodness I died. Yeah, it's a really strange way to end the book. But so I did finish this and all the little novels in it. It was hard work, I have to say, partly because I've not been very good at concentrating. And I was reading this, which was very dense, and then this, which was very dense, and I've given myself maybe too much to chew. Oh well. Another book I read, so technically I suppose I did read 2 books because I read this. It was the 3rd of the Demon Headmaster series. It's good fun. I hadn't read it as a kid, and I read the first 2 loads and loads of times. It's all about the Demon Headmaster conning kids into buying all this stuff with this hideous pig on it. It was good fun. I read it on the train ride on the way to Prince of Egypt, which I might actually make a video about. And then another book I've started, Big Beast, the essays of Michel de Montaigne, sorry. As a kid I thought it was Montaigne, and I've kind of kept that pronunciation in my head. I've had this book for years and years now. I've often dipped into it, but rather like when I read Anatomy of Melancholy, I read that in 3 chunks, 1 chunk a year. And I found I enjoyed it a lot more just reading it. So this is what I'm going to do with this. And I'm not even going to do 1 chunky. I'm going to just read through the whole thing. So I'm that way far through so far. But I've got to put it down because I'm reading William Cooper for the Samuel Johnson book group. So I'm going to read William Cooper and then come back to this. And he's hilarious. I really like him. He's good fun. He spares no excuse to talk about his penis. He loves talking about all kinds of weird things. He's talking about the imagination at one point, and he gets distracted by talking about people who control the musicality of their own farts. Another point, he was talking about a friend of his who is terrified of cream. So yeah, I really do like this, and I'll probably have a better chat about that next month. And that's me done. So yeah, only 1 book and a little kid's book read, but quite a lot read if I just look at the chunks of pages. Maybe it hasn't been as unproductive as I thought it had been, but I do hope March is more productive. Thank you very much. February.